All right, so welcome everybody to this Novasutras discussion of radical land reform in the USA. Novasutras is an eco-spiritual movement that addresses ecological crisis with two key principles, Agaya and Ubuntu. Ubuntu can be thought of as interdependence, as an interdependent co-arising, and is often translated, it's a Southern African word, as I am because we are. Agaya is a neologism. It's a new word made up of agape, which is a great transcendent love, and Gaia, which is the sense of the earth as a living being, self-organizing, and the marriage of those two, we think captures a new awareness that we're all developing. And now, please welcome our event presenter, Michelle.
Thanks, Paul. So, let me get myself arranged a little bit here. So we realize that right now we are facing some serious challenges. Homelessness and hunger are surging, especially in response to the recent pandemic. And the events of the last couple of months, triggered by the police killing of George Floyd, have really brought into sharp relief that we are living in a country that's built on a legacy of slavery and genocide. That means that we have structural economic racism. And I highly recommend, if you haven't seen it, I'll post it in the chat, the YouTube link for a video, a woman named Kimberly Jones, How Can We Win? And she uses this metaphor of, you know, we've been playing this Monopoly game, but it was so stacked at the start that American descendants of slaves had no way to even get close to succeeding. The pandemic has also highlighted some problems with our food distribution systems, the vulnerability of large cities in pandemic situations. We know that the reason that people of color in particular have been more impacted by COVID-19 has to do with issues of poor nutrition and poor health. And some of that poor health can be directly tied to a lack of outdoor time, lack of opportunities for exercise, lack of opportunities to be in nature. And those lacks in everyone are increasing the frequency of diseases of despair. Alcoholism, opioid addiction, all of that. We also know that, you know, before COVID became the thing that 2020 seemed to be all about, the world was on fire. And here in the middle of 2020, the world is on fire again. We are in the clutches of a vast climate crisis. So we urgently need to find ways to capture carbon and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And finally, a lot of these problems tie in with a real lack of civic engagement. So this idea was, how do we put all of that together in one package in a way that actually makes it easier to solve all of those problems at once? We can finally honor some of the treaties that were broken to Native Americans. We can finally honor the promise of reparations for American descendants of slaves. We can provide housing, employment, and food security for millions of people if we do this right, by creating a better system for growing and distributing food, a system that gives people time to be in connection and an active participant in the living world, a system that provides supports for civic engagement and building the skills needed to do that successfully, and a system that makes sure that everyone has access to nutritious food. This video, which I think I'm going to skip for now, but I'll again paste a link in the chat in a minute, talks about an integrated system that produces energy along with soil nutrients and carbon capture. It's not the only system out there. There are lots of ideas for doing things like this. They just haven't been implemented, and largely it's because they're not profitable, whatever that means. A lot of the land in the US is currently under cultivation. A lot of it is being farmed. But that farming is no longer what it had been 100, 150 years ago, mostly family farms. No, that farming now is, the majority of it is concentrated in a very few hands. About 66% of the value, the sales generated from farm produce comes from just 5% of farms. 60% of the land under cultivation is just 5% of the farm owners. There is still, in the US, a lot of family farms and a lot of smallholders. But there's a lot that isn't. And we need to make the distinction between those and then talk about how we break up those monopolies, how we make the shift from right now, only 2% of the US population works in agriculture. It was over half 150 years ago. We can shift this and do better. Finally, I want to bring up Elinor Ostrom's work. So how many of you have heard of this term, the tragedy of the commons?
Yep.
Yeah, Elinor, who won a Nobel Prize for it, went out and looked for that and discovered it was bogus. It was an idea that was a thought experiment, and it's not how the real world works. The most successful commons or pooled resources have this pattern of how they are governed, how they are managed. And it has to do with having clear boundaries around the group, and really having lots of local responsibility and authority to manage by the people who are doing the work that uses that common pooled resource, so that they can watch out for cheaters and address them accordingly. So pulling all of that together, this sketch of a plan to solve all of those problems at once is to retake land from the largest landholders. Particularly what's happening increasingly is that investment firms, and not all of them US-based investment firms, are buying up huge chunks of land in the US and then leasing it back to farmers. So the priority here would be to take blocks away from the biggest landholders and take them in largest chunks so that that land can be held as a commons with community management by local participants. To be fair in the distribution, there should be a lottery for those interested in obtaining land rights and training to participate in this, with a high preference for American descendants of slaves and Native Americans, particularly Native Americans on lands that either were never ceded, or rather Americans who have title but may not currently be on land that has never been ceded, or land that was only taken through treaty violations or through treaties that were clearly unfairly negotiated. Those people need to be provided with training in regenerative polyculture and permaculture methods that can truly increase the productivity of the land relative to large commodity farming, and methods that are shown to capture more carbon. To provide stability, there needs to be some kind of commitment to long-term tenure, that people will be tending land that they know they can tend in perpetuity and can go to their children, with some careful negotiations about exchanging those leases or selling those leases, so that no one is trapped, but no one is just using it as a means of turning it over to try and make profit off of the sale. This would be land that, much like the early settlers, is given freely by the US government. There's no mortgage, there's no loans. And I think really importantly for keeping this functional, there's no taxes on the land and what it produces. There would only be a tax on anything that's actually sold, so that people are not taxed when they're producing for themselves and their community. There would be a need for assistance to provide housing on that land, and there would be a need for some food assistance to start, because permaculture and polyculture methods, especially if you're using largely perennial crops that are the best at carbon storage, it takes time for those to be productive. The first year, nobody's going to be able to live off of what they're producing. So we need to build in a system of support. And some communal functionality, like those green powerhouses. And again, I'll put that link in the chat in a little bit, or some similar infrastructure where you have greenhouses for winter production, where you have local energy production, where you have energy available for doing things like food preservation, and that kind of work. So that's the overall idea. And it is very radical. But as we've been talking about, you know, that idea of what is possible can be really different, given the fact that we are so deep in so many crises right now. The world is becoming very, very unstable, and we need to develop the ideas that we want for a different future going forward, because there will never be another time where we have this much possibility for big change. All right, so that's what I had. And Benny, if you want to take over here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm wondering if you could handle the timer on our quiet moment of quiet.
I can do that,
Because
yes.
I did not
I got it set up.
fully prepare that.
That's fine.
So we're gonna take 2 minutes
Okay.
and just settle into this download we've just received.
All right.
The seed of what could be. Welcome back into this collective space and into your body. I am sure that we're just going to dive right in here. I saw Leoma first raise her hand, but I also want to welcome Francesca, who jumped in just as we started the presentation with Michelle's guidance. So hi, Francesca, how you doing?
I'm fine, thanks.
Leoma, what came up for you? I saw you raise your hand.
Well, did you put the name of the author of that book about how the theft of the commons or the loss of the commons was a falsehood?
I did not, but I will put that, add that to chat also. That's Eleanor Ostrom. Oh, it's actually this, these last couple of links, especially the second from the last link that I put in there from the On the Commons magazine. Gets you to it. It's Eleanor Ostrom. Yeah, and there's a fair amount of summaries of her work that are available online. I haven't read it yet, but everyone says, well, her actual text is really academic and, you know, not very accessible, unfortunately.
A lot of things talking of the people making commentary.
Oh. Oh, that sounded like the Kimberly Jones video.
Yeah. Let's, if I may, I think it's to bring things to center. We have a few questions, and a lot of them kind of center around balancing, protecting the land and honoring the land and nature's rights, while also honoring people's needs, the collective need, the community's needs, which is an honoring of Agaya and Ubuntu. But Michelle just really laid out an incredible vision for exactly how this might be achieved. And I'm wondering if there's anybody had some insight into what more might be needed in that outline. And maybe it might be helpful just to cue a possibility that if it seems possible or it possibly needed, we could go back to that outline of the radical land reformation plan. But for now, we're going to stay with each other fully. And I think the question that I'm curious about is there any insights into what else with relation to this radical land reform vision and outlined plan? Paul?
So first, I just want to say that was brilliant, Michelle. You got so much said. You introduced it. You just created such a clear vision in so few words in so little time. I really felt it was masterful. I do think we could add things, but I'm not sure that it would be better. I'm just going to list a few. One of the things that I talk about a lot on Twitter to young people who are asking, what do we do now? Is that I personally feel that reality is guiding us to the questions we need to ask. And that for the wealthy countries, having to ask in this pandemic, what is essential? It's the first time America has asked that question as an industrialized capitalist country. And that one of the answers a lot of climate researchers like me are seeing to the climate crisis, and the head of the IEA just said this pretty recently, is that a lot of what's not essential that we've shut down needs to be shut down kind of permanently. He says the carbon rebound, if we just went back wholesale, just restarted it all, would doom climate targets. So I see this talk that you've just given in a way as an extension of that, as a way of saying, okay, we're being asked to focus on what's essential. And the other things were just sort of helpful. Well, maybe one other, no, just some facts about topsoil loss, pollinator extinction, just helping people to get a picture so that they know that what we're talking about changing is a totally unsustainable system whose logical consequence is mass starvation. Because you never want to set yourself up like, oh, we're proposing this radical change from a system that's really well set. No. Otherwise, I thought it was just perfect. A+++.
Thanks.
Really well said input, Paul. I agree wholeheartedly with it all. I saw Derek's hand.
Yeah, I just want to key off of what Paul was saying there and make two quick points. One is this bit about non-essential work needs to permanently be shut down. So that involves, and I would like to see us present in the conversation, this idea that taking care of others is an essential job. And so that means in terms of even like Paul and you and I were talking about this the other day, that even in terms of a universal basic income, that can be seen as we're going to pay you so that you have the ability to take care of somebody else, whether that's your children or your parents or somebody who's sick or a neighbor. That's what UBI is for, is so you can be paid to take care of others. And that really gets us to the second point I want to make, which is a new social contract, a new contract that says we as a society value human life more than profit, even more than an economy that allows people to make huge amounts of wealth at the expense of everybody else. And so the new social contract is really about everybody has the opportunity to develop their gifts, to give their gifts to the community, and to take care of each other. And that is real healthy relationship, healthy community, and healthy nature, getting that social contract in place so that we all agree that what we're going to do is make sure everybody has what they need to survive, to be, to show their unique selves, their unique gifts, and to be valued for that, no matter what that turns out to be.
Oh, thank you, Derek. If I may, I feel called, what came up for me in my quiet was that we're talking about reparations as well, right? And one of the things is that it's such a sensitive matter, and I don't want to be offensive, and I don't want to seem like some white boy projecting what should be. But for me, when I feel like, with regards to this process, the need and desire, the longing, even, I say that the word longing, to find a better life, to build a better life for your children is so important. It's why it's why parents risk their lives to migrate through the entirety of Central America to come here. And it's why people work 3 jobs. It's that honoring that deep longing to build a better future for your children needs to be fully held in a nuance. It's such a nuanced thing because you can't just plop a family on a farm. That's not going to work. So education is what came up for me. And I'm going to call in Zach Stein, Education in a Time Between Worlds. I don't have a link for it, but I'll throw it in the chat. Thank you.
I'm just throwing in questions like Paul. I'm not sure that they're ones that need to be added to what goes out, but one is that if this giving of land, if give is the right word, is tied to practices that help the climate and the carbon load, that is an impingement on individual freedom. Will be, in this country, will be seen as we have lost our traditions of common land use. A lot of that, I think, was lost when people left whatever countries they were coming from. And that myth that common land use destroys the commons, I'm glad that somebody's debunked it, because I had heard it talked about as fact rather than dogma. You know, sort of on par with gravity. And so that's one whole question issue. And another one is the whole question of what's essential and what's not. I think there needs to be a bit of conversation around that. I mean, the conversations need to go beyond this group if it's, of course, if this is ever going to go anywhere beyond this group. And when I hear people say people over economics, I don't think of the rich guys. I think of all the masses of people for whom economics is whether you can pay the rent and feed your kids. In other words, whether you can have food or shelter. And it's not the conversation for right now, but the whole thing of, but it's part of this conversation of how do we restructure things. I mean, printing money doesn't, by itself, does not do anything except start chaos. But also, anyway, so those questions of what's, like, is the movie industry essential? I mean, there are a lot of things that people do. Playful things. Having meetings of Barbie dolls online. I mean, I know somebody, I mean, just to presence the fact that these are not straightforward sort of things. I know somebody, a young person, who knows all about goats and goat carts, and has actually got a sort of a worldwide, I think worldwide online presence as somebody who knows how to build goat cart harnesses and all that. She's also into designing clothes for Barbie dolls so people can have these Barbie doll conventions and Thanksgiving dinners together. And, you know, things are not cardboard cutouts.
Thanks, Leoma. Just before we bring Bob's wisdom into the circle, I want to pause here and ask a bit of a clarification, which was you mentioned that when you, Leoma, think of economics or people over economics, you think of the, average person, not about the richest of the rich. And Paul commented that 60% of Americans say they get zero benefit from the economy. And I'm curious if you want, like, I felt like there's a distinction to be made between economics and the economy. Which is that, I guess I'll just talk from my perspective, which is that economics is, what I heard from you was people over economics is the way that people over the way that money dictates interactions of people. So economics referring to the way that money dictates how people interact. And what I heard from Paul is that when he heard the word economics, he heard the economy. I am wondering if we want to just brush what I just said aside, or do you feel like there's a clarification that only I carry here that needs to be made?
I think that's a good, I was referring to something slightly different, but I think that what you brought in needs to be put in.
I'd like to jump in really quickly on that in terms of, I draw a distinction between making a profit off of other people's labor versus making sure everybody has what they need to be able to be creative and to be able to be of service to the community. And so rather than trying to put a Band-Aid on the economy to make sure that nobody gets too rich, I'd rather we do something where, like back to Leona's point about theater and arts and somebody who's designing dresses for Barbies, creativity is so useful to the soul that I'm not saying that, I think that's essential, that's a very essential labor, being creative, being artistic, doing movies, doing plays, doing song, doing dance. This is all feeding the soul and making the world a better place. And so that should be supported. How can we give people what they need in terms of food and housing and water and healthcare so that they can be creative and lift us all up in that manner? And so that's where I think the economy gets reworked, is to say, does this serve life? No, making a bomb does not serve life. That is non-essential, that stops, okay? Versus, does writing a song that people enjoy, does that serve life? Yes, it does. And so how do we shift the focus off of money and the need to pay for your sustenance and put the emphasis on what's best for the community and how do we ensure you're around to give us your gifts?
I feel like that was a beautiful response. Thanks, Derek. Leoma?
So this conversation about land is, of course, an entryway into the conversation that Derek was bringing forward. It's because it's not just about doing one thing. I mean, it's not like the land is separate from the economy. And when I referenced that statement, I was referring to how people say in COVID-19, at least we chose people over the economy, which I found to be the statement by itself seemed to be a pretty superficial one, as if the jobs of the average masses of people were not about survival. And so that we're starting a conversation with this land conversation about not only survival, but creativity and all the rest, and what's needed for that.
Bob, I had interrupted the train of thought that you must have had. Do you want to share?
That derailed at the last station, I think, at this point. But I just had a couple thoughts. One about I've thought about this often, our entertainment, especially being more confined. What is it? Movies, film, television, which has, I think, become kind of superior in its dramatic ability lately and its literacy and everything. I mean, we're seeing some pretty remarkable stuff. The worst aspect of it is the economic underpinnings of it, which make it also at times wasteful and counterproductive to, if we could substitute money and economics for well-being. If was a study of well-being, what does well-being mean? I don't know, but it means more than money does. Money is a mere exchange. Money is just a mechanism that means I need a place saver because I have all this, but I need that, you know. But the arts do enrich. They remind me, and I assume they remind everybody, of things that they feel like they know, but they really haven't had much thought about them lately. Usually they're a refreshing type of thing to add to our well-being. I thought, well, how do you fund if you want to watch, Cursed on TV or Game of Thrones or something? Everybody else is going through GoFundMe. So I keep thinking there needs to be some sort of mechanism for people in a very democratic sense to get rid of HBO and Amazon and everybody else by just self-selecting, self-paying. For somebody's going to have enough funding to do certain things. It might mean that those things are a little scaled down, but people will still, anyway, this isn't our big issue here, but entertainment it's not a non-important issue, I think, because what's the old saying that, why do you preach to the choir? The answer supposedly is because if you don't, every once in a while they start getting depressed. So that's sort of the same with art, just to see ourselves reflected in something that, at least in a tiny sense, is maybe will even outlast us if it's solid enough, universal enough. My thoughts, if Michelle's initial questions here about what are your concerns? What are your concerns? Where do you see problems? What are you worried about? It's all one question, and it's always the one that I come up against. And I think it's probably a kind of a cliche of thinking about this. Two things that come to mind immediately, and these are very at a superficial level, kind of just an immediate level. One, I'm not particularly sure I feel anyone should own more than one place of living, period. And the other thing is, I think we need to change, this is kind of a bit of overreach at this point for what we're talking about. We need to change what the legal meaning of incorporating is, if we indeed even are going to continue with any kind of incorporation. And I think that property needs to be seized and put as a public trust until we can educate ourselves and come up with the means. And there is going to be an interim where do people get food? This isn't any kind of lightweight thing, or healthcare, or any of these, the things that we actually know are necessary. You don't have to think very long to know which things are actually necessary. I mean, I like my television, but more than eating, more than getting help from somebody who knows some doctoring, no, it's not more important. I guess to me, that's just the rudimentary part of what is well-being, what allows well-being, what allows a person to exist and have any sense that they can begin to connect to, they can begin to think of how they belong in this world, with the world and with the people in it, the other people in it. So the well-being thing is, because right now we're watching the government seize everything it possibly can that's not nailed down to reverse any protections for people. We're seeing a very aggressive, active process of this happening right now. So it's not like there's not a contrast that we can discuss. Well, this is what's happening right now during these crises. These are the responses our government, such as it is dealing with. And how do we feel about that, really, fundamentally? In some sense, it's a little broader, but I think it's just very challenging for people about ownership and property and money. And I agree with everything everybody said. I'm just stuck with the same old thing about the same old language about how do you bring this to people in a way that's broad enough and inclusive enough that it could be effective. And like I said, the two things that came to mind, one is that people there has to be a limit on certain types of wealth. And one of them is people flipping houses and owning estates and everything else. And that detracts from everybody. It really takes away something from everybody. And the other one is the whole idea that we don't really have a capitalist anything. We have a corporate form of an economy that's a type of oligarchy. That's what rules every country in this world, I think. So those have to be broached, and we have to have some really good, presentable, public-worthy ideas for people. Those are my concerns. That's my reaction to what I've heard. All of this is wonderful, but now I'm going to shut up.
Thanks, Bob. I think everything you said was on point. before we keep the train going, I want to welcome Cecily, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Polly.
Yes, Cecily, Polly's not here right now, but I am, and I had it in my book for 2:30, 3:30, and I realized you've already been at this an hour. So sorry.
That's all good. Where are you calling it from? Where are you?
Oh, down the road from Michelle, actually. I'm in Ben Lomond.
Oh, wonderful.
So fascinating talk. I can't imagine how this is going to get off the ground, but hey, we're talking about it. That's exciting.
Yeah, we're here, and I think we're just gonna go ahead and let you come in with us. We've had a train of thought, and we're gonna keep trucking along. So please just let us know if you have something come up for you that you want to share, and if anybody else has something come up for them recently, pop in.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd kind of like just to point us back to what Michelle actually delivered, because it seems to me this is such a vital topic, and there are multiple ways of going about it. You could do a presentation that was only about how everyone will starve if we don't do what we're talking about. You could do a presentation that framed the whole question in terms of the most recent things that climate science can tell us, which are really like the end of everything in about 50 years. And so that the status quo, the association of the status quo with security really is kind of insane. There's all sorts of ways. What I loved that Michelle actually did, though, is to make a purely affirmative presentation. So her approach for Cecily, who missed it, was to say, what if we could solve all these problems at once? And then to sort of unfold that to show how we indeed could, by reclaiming land from the unbelievably concentrated corporate ownership of it, and returning, as the UN said we should in 2014, to small farms, and certainly to sustainable methods. But what I loved about Michelle's talk was that it was full of possibility. And I can count on one hand the number of talks that had anything to do with the climate crisis that were as effective as Michelle was today at creating a vision of a future that is desirable. There's AOC's, A Message from the Future with AOC, which I mention all the time, and there's a young activist whose name I can't pronounce, I just discovered, who has a variation on that. But affirmative visions call for a different kind of discussion. What you want to do is flesh out the affirmative, not problematize it, not ask the obvious questions, but try to see, okay, can we make it materialize? And so anyhow, that's my thought.
Great. Thank you. I trust this is being recorded. Derek? Michelle? Yeah, great. Good.
Francesca, please.
I came in a little late while you were giving the Novasutras piece. And I feel tremendously ignorant about this whole topic, and so I'm listening hard, but I can't get past the point of, if we do this, then that will happen, but what does it mean to retake the land? How realistic is that with any scenario? And So I'm just stopped at that point. So that's all.
So I actually had a notion on that today. Sorry, I'm just leaping in, huh?
Go for it.
Okay. But I had an idea about that it could be a kind of an incrementalist approach, but of course it's going to meet a huge amount of pushback, which is we tweak the property and inheritance law tax in a way that says anybody who owns over X amount, you're going to lose 1,000 acres per year. You have to give up 1,000 acres. Doesn't have to necessarily be all in one parcel, but no smaller than 400 acres. And each of those parcels have to match your median productivity, so they can't just give away the crappy stuff first. And that is how their taxes are paid, not cash to the government. You must give up this land that you really shouldn't have anymore. So that's one mechanism for taking it, and for not taking it too fast, because again, this can't roll out all at once. You know, we can't just pick everybody up and put them on the land. It's going to take training, and some of that is going to be training and testing it out in a few communities here, and then having those people, some of them who are interested, be available to become trainers in other communities. That's, you know, it's got to be a process that can evolve itself. Now, it has to be rolled out as fast as we can pull it off if we are going to deal with a lot of the crises that we have when it comes to soil loss, climate, pollinators, and of course, yeah, just homelessness and hunger. And we're going to have to do some really tricky stuff with how do we handle homelessness and hunger in that interim in a way that builds us toward this.
Go ahead, Francesca.
So I'm glad you said incremental. It gives it some scale. And that's kind of what I was thinking. Somebody, maybe Derek, you brought up before about what does it mean to deal with corporations? How do we define corporations? And so, Michelle, it seems to me what you're thinking about is how to change the laws in some way that automatically makes something happen. And what occurred to me as people were saying things is, I can imagine towns or small cities getting to a point of actually seizing land by using the idea of eminent domain.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other
Right.
obvious process. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking, that means getting everybody behind it. And that's the process of everything we're doing anyway. And it brings up the questions that Bob brings up about well-being or quality of life, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm completely off track, just trying to think a little bit more in terms of scale, because I think it's important to have the conversation where we have, okay, if this happens, then let's look at it in terms of how we divide up the land and whether there are taxes, and who gets taxed and all of that. But I don't know, for me, I need to see a beginning before so maybe this conversation is both, brainstorming and dreaming about what could be and the structure of it. But it's also, for me, I just need a little piece of reality testing.
So Francesca, you fall in the category that I had in mind as an audience person. when I said that one way to do this, and it's not what Michelle did. I personally kind of prefer what Michelle did, but one way to do this, to get around that, is to really emphasize at the start that the corporate agribusiness system, using data that no one contests, is taking us very rapidly, like within my great niece's lifetime, to mass starvation, to total topsoil loss, to total pollinator extinction. And that it is part of a phenomenon where corporate ownership and control has become so concentrated that it's completely abstracted from reality, and people are not thinking about what they're doing at all, right? So agribusiness in Brazil, Francesca, put Bolsonaro in office. Agribusiness in Brazil is the driving force behind let's destroy the Amazon as quickly as we possibly can. I mean, you can, in about 10 minutes, leave the status quo in ruins on the floor as an extinction factory. And that's one way to deliver a talk that just sort of clears that little association between the status quo and security into the dustbin of history where it belongs. It is not appropriate for this moment. And then we can maybe talk a little bit about what are people doing that points in this direction. Like, people keep declaring climate emergencies. Why do they do that? The impulse to declare a climate emergency is to say, okay, our normal rules for what is and isn't feasible or something we can consider or allowable to talk about are no longer appropriate because we're all going to die soon. So we need to change the rules. That's why we keep declaring climate emergencies. Unfortunately, what happens when we declare them is that we get state governments, for example, making pledges. We have lots of pledges with no action at all attached to them. But the declaring the emergency is important. But we could declare an emergency about how food is produced without a climate crisis. We don't need a climate crisis. So, I mean, those are points I think maybe if Michelle and I tried to do it together, we could like somehow try to weave some of it in while preserving, because I really think getting a vision of just what's desirable, where do we want to go, who benefits, how does it correspond to the issues that are most highly charged and alive right now. And I thought she did that so well, but.
I was thinking the original New Deal was constantly being tweaked, and it was being tweaked by public reaction and dealing with every other related activity in the United States. The Green New Deal seems like it's just begging for the type of transitional education that we're all pointing toward. You can't just plop people on the land and expect them to do. This is exactly the appropriate function for something like that as an idea. How you can flesh it out to, well, what are we going to do if we have to leave this old system? I mean, it seems like that's what I first thought when I heard Green New Deal. I thought, well, that's what it is. Somebody's come along thinking about, we have to start retraining people for what the hell we need to do. And I think that seems logical enough. As you pointed out, Paul, initially, even Republicans at the end of, I don't know what it was, 2017 or something, were saying they're on board. They're all for it. And then the media, which is, if I could do one thing, I might break up the media. I might try to disincorporate the media or have the public have an active role in assuring a channel's continuity. I'd break up the amount of ownership any person can have. There'd be no Rupert Murdoch, there'd be no William Randolph Hearst. There'd be none of these people because we don't need them. They've proven how ineffective they are and the promotions of well-being in life. And just surely through disinformation, heavily moneyed disinformation. But yeah, the media seems like another, we haven't really mentioned that, but that's a, that's been generating a lot of the opposition. It's surely been generating a lot of the opposition that we have. So it's another important part of this. Anyway, sorry.
Well, I just have to say that this COVID crisis that we're in, with so much being shuttered, travel being stopped, and us seeing the results of less pollution in the atmosphere. I mean, cities all over the world are actually breathing air, and Himalayas are being viewed by Indian folk who haven't seen them for 30 years. I mean, all these positive results of us slowing down, less CO2 in the atmosphere. And not only that, but now we also have an enormous number of people who are unemployed. Employers realize now that more people can work from home. We're going to have an enormous number of folk who will need occupations, who will need jobs, who will need training for what might be that we can't, well, I certainly can't even imagine, but there are lots of people, there are going to be lots of people who will be only there ready to learn the new skills and tools to put them into a place of managing to keep themselves going and their families. I mean, this is really very, I've not been thinking all that. Anyway, that's all I'm thinking, is that there are going to be opportunities that we haven't even thought of at this point. Opportunities for folk who will want the trainings.
I agree with that. I wanted to just, I think a lot of people are seeing, they're noticing a difference directly in the environment, and that's very much a good thing. If we think of what we were doing before, what we need to do now, we literally do need to live up to the phrase working smarter, not harder, because the story of our world has just been working harder and harder and harder, more productivity and less to show for it. And what we need to do is concentrate on the essentials and work smarter. And the person who does that, I think, can then be really seriously called the true conservative. They're conserving the things that we all must have and not promoting things that are toxic, literally toxic. So that would be a talking point, I guess, for this whole discussion, that it's really about working smarter, not harder. It ideally will mean less labor for everybody overall, I would guess. And to the extent that we have benign or non-polluting technology, it's about time for that to really show up, instead of something that's ugly and polluting, and this just simply displaces people economically even more from the few tasks they have to stay in the world. So it's time for that to happen as well. But really, the true conservative, maybe we should start building the real manual of what it means to truly be a conservative.
What you just said is so brilliant, because it puts a more where a less was. I can't get what the head of the IEA said about we can't have a carbon rebound out of my head. So I led off with, we have to permanently shut down a lot of the non-essential, but that's a less. The other way to say it, climate scientists told Britain that if it wasn't going to change its fuel sources, it could actually meet its goals by a 9-hour work week. They said would be defensible as a climate policy. The New Economics Foundation in the UK has come up with a 22-hour work week that for them is the maximum, right? So what we're talking about really is more life, less working to earn life. Working to earn life and life are not the same thing. And most of us would like more life and less getting to life. So it's really about more, not less.
Thank you. I really also appreciated what you said about affirmativity. And I dropped in a video about Adam Purple and the Garden of Eden in New York, which is an incredible thing that occurred and then was demolished. And just what he did and how he talks about it is inspiring. I don't know if it's applicable here, but for me, the root here that I've been thinking about is that you just start doing it. You just start doing it. And you empower others to find you doing it and copy and paste. And it's simple. It's as simple as that. If you can make it that simple, then it's as simple as that. And I know it sounds idealistic, but I think that's also part of our problematization framework that comes into play so often. And this desire to, anyways, I'll stop talking. I feel like that's really important, is just do it. And what came up to me also, just one thing, is if you look at the map that Michelle posted, which is a USGS map that I've never seen before, that is just, it's an incredible map. And if you look at the Central Valley and compare the density of agriculture there with the density of agriculture in the Midwest. I mean, everybody thinks about the Midwest as being the breadbasket, typically. The density of agriculture in the Central Valley of California is just astounding. And so it feels to me a lot of these things, we talk about prototypes and beta and all this. If there's a place that is perfect for a test run, you would think, okay, so what is, more or less contained and a good testing place for how to just start doing it? I see the Central Valley. I mean, that is a laboratory for making this change, if I've ever seen one. And I, just want to presence those possibilities of just do it and kind of learn to improve and share as best as you can through that process.
So I just want to jump in because I'm having a little brainstorm here between, especially Benny, that was just the sort of the cherry on top of well, just do it. And Bob, what you had been saying about media and the discussion that we had around entertainment, I'm like, okay, so here's how we start this as a proof of concept, is that we don't even bother trying to get government to claim some land. We get a reality TV show to claim some land and set this up and do it. And, and they can Big Brother film it or whatever. And they've got the money. They could do it tomorrow. We could do it anywhere.
That's a great idea.
My concern with reality TV show premise is like, yes, I get that it's a great way to marry spreading the word that this is happening really immediately, and also money available like a fire hydrant to throw at this, but it's also bringing in cameras and ego, and that the ego aspect of reality television, of being filmed doing something, is toxic.
But that's the style. That's a style that a couple of people basically invented. We could do a reality show that really is really about the fundamentals of what's happening, that would engage people, that would interest. I would certainly watch that show, and I hate reality TV. I don't watch any of it usually.
We could do it. We could start it out on community television, of course. You know,
Well,
that
but
way.
that's not where the money is.
Yes. Oh, darn.
Also, what Benny said about just do it. That's what I used to always say about that's how change actually happens. One place does something, it works. Somebody sees or reads about it, they try it, it works. That's what makes something mushroom. Even if it's some crappy commercial product that catches on, it's always the same thing. It has to have people who are fundamentally invested in it and say, yeah, I really like this. This is great. And people hear about that. So the thing of just do something. I don't know this guy you're talking about, Adam Purple. Is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anyway, I'll have to look that up. But anyway, but I think that's a great idea about, I keep thinking about films that are about people building the future successfully. That I don't think there's anything out there like that, is there? Okay, we've changed this part of the government. We've changed this part of the, I mean, something, we watch fantasies about every other time period in history. And I think they're very, it's a very fetching thing. People are very taken by it, possibly because of the millennium, just because I think people are very aware of other ages of things and the fact that we're going through obviously a transitional age, whatever people say about it. I think everybody knows that this is very transitional. But I think a form of art that grabs people would be wonderful. That would just be wonderful. Something that engages them with things we already know appeals to people, I think would be great.
Yeah, and I appreciate the thought of, you know, video and TV show, and as tapping into that, the medium that touches the most people the most. But again, that cannot be the context of how this work is carried out. The context must be.
No, it's an inspiration though. That's all.
Yeah, totally.
That's what it is. It's an inspiration. Yeah.
Totally. But like when we talk about using a reality TV show to fund the thing, that is a foundational context that we've set up for ourselves. Anyways, it's just something that I feel is really important. And we have 5 minutes here for our official end time. And so let's brevity, if anybody needs to go, and, you know, maybe we'll find a natural good place to close here soon.
I would love to close. I just want to say again, Michelle.
Paul, sorry to interrupt, but Francesca and Leoma had their hands up. Can we hear
Okay.
very briefly?
Okay, this is just very quick. I think I just have to stop using my iPad because every time somebody posts something in chat, I have to obliterate the screen because of the size of it. And so, Michelle, if you would be good enough once more to send the text of the chat to all of us so that we have these links, it would be great. Or whoever, somebody send it.
That's
Thank you.
definitely part of the plan.
A seeds in multiple directions. I mean, this is a seed idea. If it's a reality show, for instance, the reality show needs to be about teaching people how to do the commons again. Mm-hmm. And that would be like the foundation of it is, there's the connection with ADOS. We're not done with this conversation. But it's got possibilities in multiple directions. So I hand it over to Paul.
So I would like us to attempt at least one, and I suspect more than one, successors to this session. And I have some suggestions. I don't have to offer them now, but suggestions about what we might want to do. For me, I felt like Michelle gave us a launching pad and we kind of did not launch. And that's understandable. Anytime you're talking about transformative change and it's not an existing conversation that people are having everywhere, you're an initiator. That's what political action is all about. It means you initiate something that isn't happening otherwise, how change happens. But I feel like we should try to launch. We should try to get a vision of what the future would look like if we did this. For example, I have a really specific, tangible question about, we have, many small organic farms. We have many farms that are using permaculture methods. We don't lack for demonstration projects. It's really not that. We don't not know that that works. But my nephew made a film called The Lost Crop about how hard it can be running a really productive organic farm. These people were amazing that he filmed. They could not get anyone to take it over. They were going to give it away.
Wow.
But they had this work ethic. They worked like 14-hour days on that farm. And to me, that documentary was a model of how private ownership limits us. And I really feel like we are leaving out essential parts of this conversation. Because isn't it really the case that capitalism, in cutting people off from the land, cuts us off from our sense of belonging, our sense of being in place, of belonging to the place and the people where we are? Isn't it really true that we all were worrying before COVID-19 that we might be superfluous because most people in America don't actually do anything that serves a vital role in their community? They are not actually making a vital contribution to life. The whole thing about interdependence allowing you to reduce the amount of time you spend meeting the requirements of life. And now with none of our technology, the Iroquois were able to do it in so little time. Not just food, but clothing, all their needs, that it made Ben Franklin's head spin because they had all this freedom. So, we've kind of left out, I feel like, a lot of the desirable destination. And I'd like to see us try to do that.
Okay, well, I'm going to suggest that we do our formal closeout here. And in particular, Paul, if you don't mind, I'll just go ahead and
Go for it.
Walk us through. Of course, we're trying to bring people in. We have these other events that we already have planned, and definitely we will be planning more conversations around this topic in the very near future. And I just learned today, and I'm not sure how much this topic is going to make it in, but Christine is going to have me on the radio on Tuesday on Talk of the Bay. So we'll be talking a little bit on Tuesday at 5, I think. The big cross-border event is coming up August 6th. You can support Novasutras in the usual ways. And of course, we're always looking for people who want to help out as uplifters and help us produce events like this. And we have all of the usual online and social media routes to find out more. So that's enough of that. And Benny, did you want to take us out with a quick go around if people can stay on for that?
Yeah, thank you so much, Michelle. I'm really looking forward to the next time we come together around this needed conversation and change that I think we're all eager to bring about. I think it's good for us each to share one or two words that your heart might speak to share us where your heart feels settled right now. For me, I would say my heart is settled in anticipation, really. Anticipation and eagerness.
Grateful.
I am hopeful, a glass half full.
You know, I'm really feeling Ubuntu, that this is really about what we do so much better when we do it all together.
Yeah, I'm feeling very hopeful and grateful as well, both of those, but hopeful. I don't have a lot of hopeful, so this is very nice. And I definitely am feeling that. So thank you all.
Grateful and intrigued.
And
A little overwhelmed by the amount of information, and very glad that we'll be continuing this conversation, and really glad to meet Cecily.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone so much for sharing your hearts here. And again, thank you, Michelle, for the incredible presentation you gave on this topic. Just spot on. And I look forward to the next time.
Bless you.
We all hold hands. Be well.
Be well.
Virtual hugs.
Bye.
Ciao.
Right.